WNST test, but much like when the Orioles go 10 or 11 innings and go night-night in the playoffs, the ending came all too quickly for the Maryland Terps on Thursday evening in Orlando, 76-65 losers to Xavier. And Luke Jones and I are here. And first off, Luke, I had to cancel my flight to San Jose. I mean, call me a fool, call me a buy-in guy. I mean, maybe I put too much stock into watching them play in January. I thought that they would be more representative, and I really did believe they were going to survive the weekend.
Well, I don't know if I believe they were going to survive the weekend. I thought they were going to win on Thursday night. I think you looked at this matchup, and not that it was the best matchup in the world, but you looked at the fact that Xavier had lost its point guard back in January. They had struggled even more than the Terps had. In fact, they lost 6 in a row at one point down the stretch before they recovered in their conference tournament, a Big East tournament.
Only DePaul was their Cleveland Browns.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But I think we've seen this script play out all too often since the beginning of February. I mean, how many times this year have we seen the Terps play okay in the first half? And clearly they had their issues with the zone. They kind of figured it out at the end. They took the lead going into halftime, which I think for anyone who watched the first 10 minutes of the first half, you'd be thrilled with that. They came out, and what did they do for the first 4 or 5 minutes of the second half? They played really well. Didn't look like necessarily they'd run away with it, but it looked like they were taking control of the game. They had a 6-point lead 4 minutes into the second half, and then they scored 19 points the rest of the way. I mean, it's just a really frustrating script that they followed all too often here over the last 6.5 weeks of the season, where they weren't a good second half team. We saw it so many different times from the beginning of February on. I mean, some performances, like at Wisconsin, where they gave the Badgers everything they could handle and were looking really good through the first 25 minutes or so, and then got their tails kicked completely in the second half. Minnesota, I mean, just go down the list. I mean, there were just so many performances down the stretch where they just, for all of the talk that we had about Maryland when they were 20-2 and how many second half comebacks they had and
miracle last second shots. I mean, they won a handful of those games where that easily could have just been a gaudy 17-5, right? And 17-5 would have felt nice, but they were 20-2 because they won 3 games they probably should have won.
Yeah, and I think we talked about it all year long. Just how good was this Maryland team? We know the non-conference schedule was very unimpressive. We saw what Georgetown ended up being. We saw what Pitt ended up being, and that was a game Maryland lost.
Badly.
Really
yes.
lousy in the process of that. And Pitt certainly wasn't anything special in the ACC this year. I think there was the long-standing discussion that we had throughout the season of, okay, we acknowledge that Maryland was good. We didn't really know how good. And I think we kind of got our answer over the last 6 weeks where they ended up just being an okay team. They weren't horrible. I think you still look at this team in the big picture of how much youth they did have, and that's why I don't call the season an utter failure. But at the same time, they were 20-2, and then they did lose 7 of their last 11, and the season leaves you wanting more. What was the ceiling for this team? I mean, I would have been thrilled. I think most Terps fans would have been thrilled to see them get to the Sweet 16. I don't know if that's really indicative of who they were, but you'd like to at least win in the first round. The first time in 20 years. You go back to the Keith Booth loss. Keith Booth's team final year where they lost to College of Charleston in the first round. It's just it's disappointing.
God, Keith Booth, College of Charleston. My God, I spent 10 years of angst after the College of Charleston. I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's a long time. 1997. I mean, that's for as much as we've talked about, some of the latter years of the Gary Williams era, and certainly Turgeon's first few years where they didn't make the tournament. I mean, when Maryland's gotten in, they've at least gotten to the second round, the round of 32. So.
Even with some miracles over George Mason one year. I mean, I remember some years where they were in trouble.
Drew Nicholas against NC Wilmington. I mean,
absolutely.
I mean, which as much as that didn't have the same stakes as winning the title, for my money, that's got to be the most exciting moment NCAA history for Maryland, anyway. So. It's just, again...
There weren't any exciting moments Thursday night.
yeah, there really weren't. I mean,
really?
They didn't really even seriously challenge down the stretch. It felt very much like the Northwestern game last Friday night in D.C. in the Big Ten tournament. It had that same kind of feel. I think, I will say this, I'll give Xavier credit. I think their head coach, Chris Mack, did an excellent job. Clearly zoned Maryland a lot in the first half. Maryland kind of figured that out, but he went back and forth from a 2-3 zone, used a 1-3-1, used some man down the stretch, and Maryland just, they didn't adjust.
Well, they also, Trimble did not play well. I mean, when it comes down to it, we knew all along he would be the guy taking the shots. He would have to be the guy taking the shots. 33% from field goal range, 1 of 9 from 3. Yeah. They got out-rebounded, which you knew was going to happen anyway. You tend to get out-rebounded a whole lot more when you miss a lot of shots and you don't get rebounds. So, this was a toxic game. This was the problem with them last month, lingered into this month. And, history will not be kind to this particular team, I don't think. I think when you start 20-2 and you do the fade, it becomes something the fans want to forget, not remember. And all of this fire Turgeon stuff and all that, on a day when Tom Crean gets fired, of course, John Harbaugh's brother-in-law and out in Indiana, they'll be looking for a coach. I don't know that firing Turgeon, they need better players. I mean, and they need more seasoning. Trying to do it with a bunch of freshmen running around 40 minutes a game, unless they're really, really special. And this group was okay. I'd like to see it all come back, and we'll see whether Trimble goes into the draft in 6 weeks. I'm sure he will.
Well, I can't put it all on the players. I mean, we've seen different players come through for Mark Turgeon, and we've seen similar profiles. I mean, if we're talking better players, then what was last year then, where they got to the Sweet 16? When, granted, they got farther.
They had great players last year. There's no doubt about that.
They had great players last year. So, See, this is where I've really come to change my perspective on collegiate sports. I think you do look at the fact that, and don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm not saying these players are completely absolved, but they were a young team. And, there's something that I still point to that still doesn't sit right with me. I go back to the Wisconsin game where Maryland played tough. Melo Trimble was outstanding. And they got to the final 15 minutes or so, and Trimble was kind of doing it all by himself. The freshmen didn't come to play, which you're going to have that. You have young guys; they're not going to they're not going to hold up necessarily their entire freshman year. I think the freshman wall is a real thing. I don't think that's something that you just toss out there just to say it. I think there's a physical and mental challenge to your first year of collegiate basketball where you're playing such a long schedule. But Mark Turgeon sat Trimble, benched his starters at the end of that game when the outcome was still in doubt. And you know what? Other than the big shot that Trimble hit against Michigan State, he wasn't the same after that this year. So I don't know. I'm not saying that there was necessarily a rift or a falling out, but I just saw a team that kind of, from that point on, late in the Wisconsin game where he basically, the head coach threw in the towel to send a message to his players, they didn't respond to that, and that's something where I do put some of the blame on the coaching. And I think this team, under Mark Turgeon, has been slow to adjust, in-game adjustments. I think he's a terrific recruiter. I think we'd all agree on that. But I do wonder from an in-game coaching standpoint, from an X's and O's standpoint, and this isn't me saying fire Mark Turgeon. That's not me saying this at all. But I do wonder if there are some limitations there that are going to limit them to where you say, what is their ceiling? Can he get them to a Final Four? Because I don't think it was about talent last year. And, in the case of this team, it is disappointing to see a fade, but they were very young. And that's why I'm not someone that's calling this season an utter failure, because at the beginning of the year, given the fact that they had lost 4 out of 5 starters and that they were starting 3 freshmen and that Michael Tchaikovsky would get hurt in February and they'd have no big man scoring presence down the stretch, and Dion Wiley would give them nothing off the bench.
And Nickens and Brantley gave them nothing. You're like, guys that were...
Nickens was okay earlier in the season, but you're right. He did. So, with all of those things in mind, if you tell me the Terps just make it to the NCAA tournament, I say, all right. I mean, that's solid, I guess. I'm not saying I'm not saying you ever do cartwheels over that, but I fully understand where this team was at the beginning of the season and some of the things that they went through.
20-2 colored everything differently. It really did.
But at the same time, when you are 20-2 and you go through, let's face it, a Big Ten conference that wasn't all that terribly good compared to recent years, it leaves you wanting. And I don't think the season necessarily gets viewed as a failure in the big picture. I think the future can look really bright with the three freshmen that they have. I mean, Kevin Huerter, I think you saw a lot of growth from him as the year went on. I still think he's a guy that in a couple years might be in the conversation to be one of the best players in the Big Ten. I think he's got that kind of ability. I was really pleased to see Justin Jackson kind of come out of his late season slumber. I thought you saw a kind of a re-energized version of him that looked a lot better than he had over the last 6 weeks or so.
I want to see him in the air, in the paint. That's what I want to see guys try to guard him one-on-one.
Yeah, I mean, he can shoot the lights out for a guy his size. I mean, just look at his three-point percentage over the course of the season. I like seeing him be aggressive. I mean, we saw it early in the game where he had the jam where he had that aggressiveness. So, I think with those two, I think Anthony Cowan, despite the fact that he had some obvious struggles over the last 6 weeks, I think he's someone who can be, at the very least, a poor man's version of Melo Trimble. So I think the future is very bright in that regard. I think there's a lot to like about this team moving forward, but at the same time, I'm not putting all this just on the players. I think that's an easy thing to do. That's something I'm more apt to do when you're talking about professional athletes. I think sometimes we lose sight that these are 18 to 21-year-old kids who, aren't being compensated in the same way that we look at pro athletes. So I'm not going to necessarily hold them accountable in the same exact way. And I do look at some of the similar traits we've seen from Mark Turgeon teams where haven't necessarily gotten better as the season's going on, have had issues with adjusting in game. He's a hell of a recruiter. There's no doubt about that, and they're going to continue to bring in talent over the next couple years. But it's kind of the opposite of what we said about Gary Williams. Gary, the question was always about bringing in talent. You knew he was going to coach players up and get the absolute most he could out of them. With Mark Turgeon, I kind of feel the opposite. Several years into this thing, where I do wonder if he's going to be a guy who, from a coaching standpoint, is going to be able to lead this team back to where it was 15 years ago. But, to say that fire Turgeon, I mean, that's a moot point. That's not happening right now, and it shouldn't happen right now because, this team is, this program has trended upward over the last 3 years. And I guess my biggest takeaway from Thursday night's loss, knowing how important Melo Trimble was to the turnaround of the Turgeon era, and, you kind of look at him and in the way that you looked at, players like Keith Booth and Joe Smith early on in the Gary Williams era. It's really sad to see. If this was it for Melo Trimble, it's really sad to see it end the way it did because, as you pointed out, I mean, he did not play well whatsoever.
He is Luke Jones. You can follow his journey out at Baltimore. Luke, it was a crazy day, right? I mean, all the way around on Thursday, Ravens wind up signing a Cowboys cornerback. Manny Machado is flopping around out in San Diego against Venezuela. My Venezuelan brothers. By the way, I don't like the Venezuela unis. They're a little too cartoony for me.
A little gaudy, right?
Yeah, a little XFL-ish to me. You know what I mean? Like, last time they went with the maroon and the gold, I thought that was a good look. And, of course, we got Team USA playing into the weekend as well. By the way, speaking of uniforms, those are the best uniforms for Maryland. I know you want to burn them now that they didn't play well in them, but, I'm biased, as you know. And those gold unis, I can't believe they could play that poorly in honor of Len Bias.
I can't say I'm a big fan of the gold, but...
What are you? You white? You red? You black? Or it's Maryland. They have 1,000 uniforms. This is just the one I like.
That's true. And the thing that still chaps me is when they had the 15th anniversary celebration of the national championship team, Under Armour couldn't come up with a throwback that looked like the 2002 unis. I mean, come on, man.
The 2002 unis, didn't they look like they had like little bullet piping around the?
It was
It had red, checkered, yellow. It was like
the black and gold checkered around the trimming.
That was a good look.
It was, but But no, I mean, you mentioned the Ravens. They go out and sign Brandon Carr, which interesting to see that turn out the way it did because there had been so much talk about signing Morris Claiborne. Brandon Carr, not the same ceiling. He's going to be 31 years old in May, but the guy who has never missed a game in his 9-year career, has started every game of his 9-year career. Never been to the Pro Bowl. He's not a star. He's not a number one corner, but
he's a nickel guy, right? Probably he'll be on the field 80% of the time. When they go three, he'll be the guy, right?
Well, he'll be on the outside opposite Jimmy Smith. I think the big question now is what does that competition look like between him and Tavon Young for the base defense? I think,
and they're going to draft somebody. They're going to draft somebody.
I don't think this doesn't prevent them from drafting a corner.
Another Tavon Moore, right? That kind of guy.
Maybe it's not the first round now. Maybe there's not as much urgency there. It is a deep class of corners, but certainly there's no reason why they still shouldn't be aiming to get a corner on day one or day two. I mean, I don't think this is the year where you wait again to try to snatch a corner in the 5th round. We've seen how that, for the most part, has turned out, although Tavon Young was a 4th-round pick. But I think Brandon Carr gives them an outside corner opposite Jimmy Smith that they can move Tavon Young to defend the slot in the nickel. We'll see whether it's Young or Carr as the outside starting corner opposite Jimmy Smith when they go base. But I think this is just a rock-solid kind of signing. I mean, it's a 4-year agreement, but as Adam Schefter reported, it's really a 1-year contract with options. So, kind of a pay-as-you-go situation, which is what you want when you're talking about a guy who's going to turn 31.
I think they see 2 years in this deal for me.
Yeah. I mean, if they get 2 decent years out of him, then this is a win. I think that's the reality there.
And they're waiting on whoever the kid they draft or Tavon.
Sure.
And Jimmy Smith wouldn't be here 2 years from now, and theoretically, and I like what they've done. I mean, we all bitch and we all want them to run into the basement in January and come out in February and bring Ray Lewis back in his prime, right? I mean, we all want that, but systematically, what they've done, they've had a plan. They've stuck to the plan. They clearly targeted Jefferson. They clearly targeted Brandon Williams, knowing that they could lose him, and I think that they've gotten done the things they want to get done. I think Ozzie and Eric, if you ask them this weekend, they'd say we're sleeping okay right now. I mean, we got a center issue, we got a right tackle, we got some issues, we got the draft coming up, and they always believe they're going to fix their problems in the draft. Now, that doesn't always work out that way, but they always believe that they can fix some of their problems in the draft.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to feel good about where the defense is. There's no doubt about that. I mean, that's kind of the Captain Obvious statement at this point. I mean, they still like to have an edge rusher. I think that's still something that they're going to be looking to draft early. And as I mentioned with corner, edge rusher is another position of depth in this draft. But I think it's fair to have some angst about the offense at this point. I mean, there's not much in terms of cap room at this point. They've made 2 very significant investments, and Brandon Carr is getting some real money. It's not a ridiculous deal, but he's getting some real money. To this point, the only addition they've made offensively is Danny Woodhead, a 32-year-old running back coming off of an ACL. So, and they've lost. This offense was not good last year. I've heard a lot of people talk about the defensive struggles at the end of the season. Let's not make this complete anecdotal evidence. The offense was abysmal last year. I mean, it was. They had a couple games where they played okay, but there were a lot of games that they lost because their offense wasn't good enough over the course of 60 minutes too. I mean, I can't put it all on the defense. And with that in mind, they have lost their starting right tackle. They have traded away their starting center, who I'm fine with saying that you want to upgrade there, but you got to upgrade then. They still don't have a wide receiver that you can pair with Mike Wallace that you feel good about. So, there's a lot of work to be done on the offensive side of the ball. So, I think the defense is in excellent position to be one of the better defenses in the NFL. But at the same time, even with their struggles down the stretch, it was a top 10 defense last year. So, how much improvement are you going to make there? And in turn, you got to make sure you make enough improvement to the offense. So, I'll still point to the offense being a concern at this point, fully acknowledging that you can't address every single need immediately, but at the same time, what's out there from a free agent standpoint, what's out there from a trade standpoint, That's unknown right now. I mean, free agency, there's not a whole lot left. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. Can they pull off a trade for a center, a right tackle, a wide receiver, or are they going to try to address all of that in the draft? And if you're trying to address all those things in the draft, that's where I think it gets a little more uneasy. So, defense, I think there's nothing not to like about what they've tried to do on that side of the ball, but at the same time, you don't want to just be trying to address the offense with couch change and just thinking you're going to automatically pull 3 starters out of the draft from day one anyway. So we'll see. I think overall, have they gotten better than last year? I think their defense is better. I think that's pretty obvious. But at this point, kind of have to look at their offense and say, well, their offense looks worse than it did last year right now. But alas, they're not playing any real games for close to 6 months, so there is time to address that side of the ball.
I know we have a mixed bag on the baseball side here. And don't look now, Luke, but we're 2 weeks out on opening day, right? I mean, look up. Here we go. I'm going to be out in Arizona cactusing next week, but I'm almost inclined to go see some baseball out in L.A. before I go to Phoenix next weekend. I have found myself every night watching baseball, and maybe it's because it's on at 10 o'clock at night. Maybe it's because so many of the names are familiar. Maybe it's because it's been a pretty decent brand of baseball, and they felt like real games. I know they're not. I know there's pitch count. I know but it hasn't felt like spring training when they put those uniforms on, right? Especially not for Manny Machado, who is, quite frankly, laying out for his Dominican brothers.
Well, and Adam Jones for the United States. I mean, it's already been said that Adam's kind of been the captain of that team, and certainly he's had some big moments, including a big home run early in the second round. So, I mean...
And Hosmer as well, too.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Wellington Castillo's represented well. I mean, it's been enjoyable. I talked about this before. I've written about this. I always said I liked the idea of the World Baseball Classic and hated the execution mainly because of the timing of it and the challenges that presents. I have loved this edition of the WBC. I mean, I'm guessing there's not a lot of people that have been watching, and March Madness is a big reason why, and I get that. I completely understand that. But this has been a really fun brand of baseball. It's not exactly like Major League Baseball, and you mentioned the pitch counts and some of the challenges there, but the emotion. And Nestor, you know me. I'm not an overly flashy guy. I've always considered myself to be more of an old school kind of guy when it comes to celebrations and things of that nature. And this is a really different animal than a 162-game season. So the emotion that you're seeing from all of these countries.
Every game is Game 7. Every game is the Blue Jays-Orioles wildcard game, right?
Yeah, there is. But at the same time, there's been something so refreshing about seeing some more visible emotion. And look, I'm not saying that translates exactly to a 162-game season, but we've talked about this so much. I've gotten so tired of the whole, quote, play the game the right way mentality where you never show emotion, you can never be happy.
Well, let's be honest. That's the white man's way of playing baseball.
I mean,
if you want to get into it, I'm Venezuelan. That's the way the white guys in America have played baseball for 150 years. Yes, that's correct.
I just wonder, as we've spent so much time, so much hand-wringing about pace of play and issues like that. And look, I'm not saying that there aren't pace of play initiatives that can be used. Oh, by the way, how about enforce some of the ones that are already in place that they just don't enforce? But I really wonder, and I've talked about this with some other friends of mine who are big baseball fans. We're talking so much about trying to grow the game with youth. I think it would go a long way to just eliminate this mentality that you have to be joyless while you play baseball, and what's even worse is just the whole retaliation mindset where you're just so offended that someone was better at their job than you were that you have to take actions into your own hands, and you see the nonsense that we've seen on a yearly basis, at least a half dozen times a year around baseball. You just wonder if Rob Manfred and the powers that be and the players union exercise more effort towards eliminating that and saying, you know what? It's okay to pump your fist a little bit. You know what? I don't even care about a bat flip that much if you hit a big home run in the 8th inning to take the lead. We should be able to have stuff like that in baseball within reason. There needs to be some balance there, just like we make fun of the linebacker who makes a tackle when his team's down by 3 touchdowns, and that looks silly. Same thing would apply in baseball, but it'd be really nice to be able to see some emotion shown in big spots in games, even over 162 games, and not think that it's going to touch off World War III. I mean, it's something that I would absolutely like to see curved a little bit and introduced a little bit more in baseball. And you do wonder with some of the emotion of Manny Machado, a perfect example. I think Adam Jones. You do wonder if players, if they could have a little more of a be a little bit more of a free spirit from an emotion standpoint. You wonder how that might impact the play of some players and everything. Like I said, it's a balance. 162 games is way different than what we're seeing for 2.5 weeks in the WBC or what we see for a month in October. But I think there's a middle ground there that I feel like we can find, and I think it would make the game look more appealing. And I think it's something that would absolutely appeal to youth. I think that's a far more effective avenue for growing the game than just saying, hey, we want to cut 5 minutes off the time
let's speed the game up. Right, exactly.
Yeah. I absolutely have come around on that over the last couple of years, and seeing it in the WBC, it's fun to see a little bit more outward emotion in baseball. It really is.
All right, what are you going to do now that the Terps are eliminated? I know you got 2 weeks of respite here, but it really does make the tournament not as much fun, right? I mean, I know a bunch of Big Ten teams won the other day, and we could still hate on Duke and Carolina. We'll have that, but I mean, it's just like the Mount. By the way, the Mount. We haven't mentioned the Mount.
Yeah.
Nice job for 20 minutes, and I don't think you could expect more against the best team on the planet, but pretty good effort by the Mount. It was fun to watch them in the first half.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna buffalo anyone to say that I watched Mount St. Mary's very much this year, but it was nice to see them get through the first 4, and it was really fun to. And I was primarily watching the Maryland game. I flipped to the Mount. I had a couple times briefly, but to see them give Villanova everything they could handle in the first half of that game, it was just it was fun to watch, and it turned out the way you expected. There's no doubt about that, and certainly Mount, Junior Robinson not having a good night, that really hurt their chances in the end. But
they didn't score the first 10 minutes of the second half.
They went up against the defending national champion and gave them everything they could handle. They led for just about the entire first half. It wasn't until late in the first half that Nova took the lead, and then obviously had the big run to start the second half. But really nice season for Mount St. Mary's. They have nothing to be ashamed of.
Jay Wright had a hell of a halftime speech. That's what won it.
I can only imagine. The paint on the walls had to be blistering, I'm sure. But it was fun to see Mount in that kind of element. It's always fun to see one of the, not a Baltimore school, but certainly a local school be able to get in to the tournament and make a little bit of a name for themselves.
Well, the Caps and the Wizards are all I got left now for championships between now and, let's say, October. And, of course, the Ravens still out there in free agency and, making a signing in the middle of the day on Thursday. Don't go to sleep on NFL free agency. Stuff's happening around here. We will be at the NFL owners' meetings next week. And, of course, Luke will be monitoring all things spring training and WBC as we get into next week. I will be in Arizona next weekend, not San Jose. I do know the way to San Jose. I will not be going to San Jose. It's all cacti for me next weekend. You can reach Luke at WNST.net. He's also Baltimore Luke out on Twitter. I am Nasty at WNST.net. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on your Facebook as well as your YouTube WNSTV channel. We're going to be watching some hoops all weekend long and certainly feeding back out on our social channels. If you miss anything at all, you can find it in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world. On your mobile device, just download the TuneIn radio app. Our morning newspaper ships to your email inbox, even on the weekends at 7 a.m. Free of charge. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. It's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life, and at some point the cold weather will break. The cherry blossoms will come out, I promise. Last but never least, the SSV on WNST heard on Thursdays in Coons Ford of Security Boulevard, bringing you our text service. If you are on the text service, you got the Brandon Carr news first. And if there's any Oriole moves, Terp moves, things happening, you'll get it first. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Don't forget, head coach Barry Trotz of the Washington Capitals joins us Monday at Greenmount Station up in Hampstead on the off night. Caps lose an OT on Thursday night. Try to get back after it this weekend. We will see head coach Trotz Monday along with some tasty crab cakes. I'm going to get an extra one. They don't have a platter where you get 3 crab cakes, but I'm going to get 3 on Monday night because it's been too long. Carroll County, we're coming up to rock our red on Monday night. We hope to see you there. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.